walk through fire with shadows on my heels. Scars turn to stories that taught me to feel. Lost in the silence, found in the flame. Now wear my battle cry without shame. This isn't the end, it's where I begin. A soul that remembers the fire within.
Welcome back to another episode of A Warrior Spirit, brought to you by Praxis 33. I'm your host, Errol Snow. Let's dive in. My wife and I went out of town on Memorial Day weekend to visit a friend, and she was nice enough to invite us to her church. And the pastor was finishing his 5-week series on calling. You know, that voice you hear deep inside that lets you feel the passion and excitement of something you were meant to bring forth in this world. And during his sermon, he said something that really struck with me. He said we should stop thinking of it as our calling, and we should look at it like our phones. Because when someone calls us, we get to choose whether we answer it or not. And we get to decide if we send it to voicemail or even if it's the right time to return the call at this moment. And that's how many of us treat the calling God puts in our heart. We question if he even has the right number, or is it the right time to even take the call? But what if other things are happening in our lives where the call's an inconvenience to those things? You get the point. But the pastor said that if you think of it as an assignment instead of your calling, you may think of it differently. An assignment is something you must get done and something we have to figure out how to complete, no matter what obstacles we perceive we're encountering. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with Raquel Soto. Raquel is someone who has definitely turned her calling into her assignment. So much so, she's founded Break Your Limitations and considers herself your GPS for success. And she does it by combining neuroscience with the Word of God. And over a decade, Raquel has helped faith driven individuals break free from the hidden hoops and step into their abundant life they were always meant to live. And Raquel, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me here. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you. And hello to everyone who's watching throughout time and space.
I appreciate it. You're currently a faith driven entrepreneur and coach, but I love that you also combine it with the neuroscience. But were you always as faith driven as you currently are? Was it always a part of your life? Was God like always your center focus?
In waves, when I was about 13 years old, it was funny because I remember this. I remember this distinctly. I don't know if my parents remember this at all or remember it the way I remember it, but I remember being going to mass, and I'm Latina, I'm Puerto Rican, and we were mass, and we're in this beautiful church, and it's like over 500 people, and the priest said for us to open our Bibles, and and go to a verse, and so I opened my Bible because I'm a good little girl, and we're reading along, and then he ends up interpreting the verse that didn't sit well with me because it didn't. To me, didn't say what he said it meant, and so I wanted to go and talk to the priest. And if you know any Latinos, especially, well, I'm in my 50s now, it's just like that the priest is basically God. So you don't go and question him. And I was like, Mother, I always call her Mother when I get annoyed. I said, Mother, if I, if I don't go talk to the priest, you're going to be sorry because I will embarrass you. I want to know where he got the interpretation from. So I've always had some moxie in me. I always had some tenacity. I get that from my mom. So So then she said, she's like, you're not gonna go talk to the priest. I'm like, oh yes, I am. And I said, well, you don't know either. I'm looking around. There's 500 people here, and nobody opened up their Bibles. I was the only one who did. So you can't even tell me what it means, and neither can Daddy. So somebody's gonna tell me what this means. And she's like, no. And I'm like, well, I'm never coming here again. I said, and my sister's Josie. And I said, and she's not coming either. We're gonna go to the Baptist church. Maybe they have an answer for me. And so it was that summer. I remember because sometimes this is really, we're recording this is not too far from Father's Day. And I was privileged to be on a podcast on Father's Day where we're honoring men. And I ended up honoring my dad because when that was the introduction to God. I'm in Chicago. When I was growing up, every Saturday, oh man, I wish they would bring back Saturday morning cartoons. My kids are in their 20s now, except for my youngest is 16. I would totally watch them because I love animation. So we used to have the Saturday morning cartoons. And in Chicago, they would also have on WGN like foster kids. And so I grew up really being groomed with the idea of like adoption is good, adoption is great. There's always like these beautiful children who don't get adopted because, they've already gotten like too old to get adopted, but they're amazing. And so I grew up watching cartoons, right in the middle of being happy of like this idea of adoption. And so that summer, at the end of the summer, the young pastor was just like, "Oh, your father," and he would say, "Your father," and he was like describing all these characteristics. And I looked at my sister, I'm like, "I know, like, why is he talking about daddy?" Like I was confused, literally for like 5 minutes, and then he said, "Oh, your father in heaven," and my thought was like, "Oh, God's like daddy, not like daddy's like God." And it's like, "Oh, he's adopting you." And I was just like, "Oh." Well, it was like bringing up those two things together, right? Like my father, the way he was explaining God, my father was exactly like the character. And then this idea of adoption, and that kind of got married together. And so that's how I started to really understand who God was, because I'm fortunate enough to have that kind of father in my life. And so it was just like, oh, it was a no-brainer. so so I understand like the heartbeat of the father part of God. And then then I became a teenager, and then I still love God, and I ended up going to a church in the South Side here in Chicago, and I would wake up like at Sundays, like it was like 5 in the morning. I had to go across town to meet my friend's mother, who's the choir master, and it's an African American church. So then, if you've ever been to an African American church, it's like an all day affair. So we would go, she had to go to practice, and then it was first service, and then it was Sunday school, and then it was second service, and then it was grandma's house. So, for 3 years, sophomore year to like senior year, I was getting up every Sunday. I would go on like Wednesday nights or Thursdays as well. I would get jobs where like I can't work because I'm going to church those nights. I remember my parents at the time, they would argue about it. And my father, my mom's like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe she's going there. And why are you going to church all day long?" And that's really where I fell in love with Jesus, was the person of Jesus and understanding who he was at that church. And my father would say to him, he's like, "Look at our daughter. You better be glad that she's not running the streets." The way that she looks and the way the boys are always trying to date her, you're lucky that, just be happy she's going to church. So they,
Catholic girls can get in trouble too. So, but
yeah.
do you remember the scripture that you were going to go talk to the priest about?
No, I just remember that it was like something so simple that even a 13-year-old was like, "No, that's not what it says." It was, that's not what it means. You're gonna
Yeah.
have to explain it to me. And so, that was like my introduction then to like the Jesus side of God. Really falling in love with that part, of who he was and what he did for us, and how sacrificed and everything. And then when I was about 19, 20 years old, I started to like hear music. Well, I was always like singing at the locker, and there was this girl. She was so funny, and she's like, "What are we singing today?" I would just be humming and singing.
What are we singing today?
She's like, "You should really go into singing." I was like, "Nah, I can't sing." And she's just like, yeah. It was just funny because I sang it. I was singing in eighth grade. I was valedictorian, so I sang at that. I sang at my high school graduation. I would still say, "No, I can't sing. I just can carry a note." And I was like tone deaf, right? So like the teacher would play like, "Raquel, just put your voice here," and I would just follow the piano. And turns out that I have like a almost 4 octave range. So he was just like, "Put your voice here," and I'm like, "Oh, okay." And then put your voice here, and I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I'm not like one of those natural singers. Like I need somebody to tell me where to put my voice. And
Yeah.
then, and if you like the sound of my voice, I sound pretty good.
Well, you can harmonize pretty good though. But growing up in Southside Chicago, especially for a Latino, I'm 60 now, and I remember those years in Chicago. I mean, I grew up in Minneapolis, so it was like Chicago light. But I remember, even at kindergarten, I had to carry a knife to school. And
Oh, wow.
I remember how rough the neighborhoods were. And we always heard the stories of, how bad South Side Chicago is. So how did you navigate the mean streets, and I'll put that in air quotes, the mean streets of South Side Chicago in a Latino family in probably the early 80s, late 70s? Like, how did you navigate all that?
Well, I lived actually in the north side of Chicago in Wicker
Oh,
Park, and then I would visit there. So I was there 2, 3 times a week, but I was in my own little bubble, you know? So it's just like, I didn't notice it because I would go there and the people were amazing and right, the community was great. And I was very naive. I was very naive and I was very focused too. Like I was with my friend and her mom and her sister, and we would go to 118th in Indiana, and then we were just like be in the church. We would walk outside of the church. I mean, I had like no fear, but I had that as a child. Like my parents, I felt so safe. You know how the babies, when you have the babies and you tell the babies, "Oh, come on," and they're like, "Stranger danger." My mom used to get afraid because I would actually jump into the people's arms, and they were like, "Oh, I wasn't expecting that." Usually, the babies are just like, "No," and I had no fear of adults. So I just had this sense because of the way my parents were always very thoughtful, and they were like very careful about like who was around us and giving us as I always felt safe around adults because that's the way my parents really protected us. So I really didn't have any any street smarts to probably even think about. I think if I would have thought about like, really paid attention to the news or maybe the things that were going on in that neighborhood, I probably would have had reservations. But I was going there for a reason, and I really loved the community and I really loved the church, and I really was having a good time that I didn't even recognize if anything was going on. And there's a scripture that says that, right? To the pure in heart, everything is pure. And so for me, it was just like, oh, you're going all the way to the south side. My mom's like, you're going all the way to the south side. You're waking up in the morning at 5. You don't get home until 8 p.m. She's like, and you're in the south side all day long. And then you go 2, 3 times during the week. And she's scared because she's watching the news. And I was like, what are you talking about? We're fine. Like I had zero sense of fear. And I think part of that was the way my parents took care of us. And so I already had no sense of fear, which maybe in retrospect, what didn't seem very wise. But it's also like, well, where I feel God is calling me, well, He's in charge of protecting me. Right. So in my mind, I was just like, well, I have guardian angels, and and He's my father, and my natural father would protect me. Why wouldn't my heavenly father protect me? And if this is where I feel he's taking me, of course I'm going to be protected. So I never took a thought like this is dangerous or this might be dangerous or stay in the church and scared. I was never scared to go outside of the church and walk the neighborhood in the south side, just because of the way that my mindset was at the time, where this is where I'm supposed to be, and I just knew, and there was a lot of fruit from that.
can you imagine in today's world? Because it was tough enough in the 70s and 80s. Can you imagine in today's world our children going, I'm going to go to the South Side for all day, 3 times a week? We'd be like, no, you're not. You're not even going near the bus station, let alone to the South Side. Like the times, I look at all the days where like my parents would drop us off at a movie theater or at a mall or, the skating rink by ourselves and then, come pick us up 4 or 5 hours later.
Mhm.
The world today is different. You wouldn't let your kid out of your sight for 5 minutes, let alone 5 hours. So I think you had a blessing to be able to be in a world and a realm where even as tough as it was, your parents still felt safe enough for you to do that kind of thing. Did that experience set you up for future adversity, that you could just face it with the courage that you did in those times?
I think it did because I had a really great foundation of like God, and my parents, they loved God, and they really believe like, in family, and like there's like just certain things that we do because we love God, and we love family, and there's the things of protection and some wise choices to make. But my parents also, very hardworking blue collar people, and so I learned through watching, and it's true, right? Now, I'm a parent of three kids, and even though two of them are adult children now, the children do learn by watching their parents more than anything else. And I was, my parents modeled that greatly, of like, how to have goals and how to, go after them, and, and deciding, what you want, and making projects, and, trying to make wise decisions, whether it's, finances, or relationships, or anything like that. So I learned a lot about them, and I've seen them go through tough times, and how they handle it. And so that was really helpful as well. I think because I had such a strong foundation early enough, when I started to get into, life happens, things started to happen as I was in my, mid 20s and 30s, where I had just really gotten to the point of believing lies about myself and who I was. And even though I knew that I was loved, I started to buy into the lie that perhaps the world would be better off without me, that my children would be better off without me. And 4 different times they did try to take my life, where all times I was like supernaturally stopped. Like I wasn't thinking about taking it. I was actually in the process of taking my life when I was stopped. And whether people believe me or not, it makes no difference to me. But because I was like, it happens, that could change to my experience. But one of the times, like I think it was the third, yeah, it was the third time, and I remember just feeling so overwhelmed, and I figured out, because I'm great at researching, how much insulin my husband at the time, he was taking insulin, so how much insulin I needed to take in order for me to take my life. And I was like, oh, what if that doesn't work? So then I was like, okay, I know I had like some tequila 1800. I'm like, how much of that do I have to drink in order for the combination to work? So I was being like a little mad scientist. And when I figured it out in my head, I remember going to the kitchen. I opened up because I was going to do the drinking first. And I opened up the cabinet and I put my hand on the tequila bottle. And then I heard a voice behind me, and it was a male's voice. And he said, that's not going to work. And I knew it wasn't my husband. And there was nobody else in the house except for the kids. And I was like, my hand's still there. And he's like, you're just going to go into a coma and then you'll wake up, but you're not going to die. But I promise you, if you go and you go to sleep tomorrow, you will feel differently. Things will feel differently to you. Just go to sleep, because that's not going to work. And I remember going, like, taking my hand off. And the kitchen was like, it was like this. And then there's like, how they have that
Yeah.
corridor,
Yeah.
and then it goes to the rest of the apartment. So walking like a crab this way. Yeah, like I did not want to, like. Did you turn around to see what the voice was? No. Have you read what some of the angels look like? Like 1,000 eyes. They have 4 different faces. So I mean, whenever you see an angel encounter a human, what's the first thing they say? Fear not. There's a reason why they say fear not. Now there is this scripture about how you don't know if you're entertaining an angel, because sometimes they can't take, they look more human. Except for that phrase, every single time they appear to somebody in the Bible, the first thing they say is fear not. People are like on the floor, like, ah. I was like, they,
Let me ask
they
you a
look.
question though. Let me stop you for a second. How does someone who goes from loving life, loving church, loving God, and all those things, what takes them to the deeper depression that creates the lack of hope to where suicide becomes your only outlet? Because having attempted suicide several times myself, I know that the only times that I have attempted that is when I'm in complete, utter despair with no hope. If I have hope, I don't care if it's a blade of grass worth of hope. If I have hope, that thought never entertains my mind. But when there was no hope, that's the only times when that has seemed like the only outlet. So, what took you from this outgoing, carefree, blinders on girl to someone who's now wanting to attempt suicide multiple times?
It was very subtle, when they talk about like the frog in the water, and it was this perception that no matter what I did, it was never enough. And so, like, growing up with that, like, even though I was a straight A student, it was never enough. Then, going into other things and doing well and getting awards, it was just never enough. And so, having this undercurrent of like, it's never enough. It doesn't matter that I was winning awards, I was being recognized. It just, you can always do better. And so then when I got married very young. I was like, I'm going to be 22 that month. And it was more of that, like, oh, that was great, but you can always do better. And having that pressure of nothing I do is enough, which then gets translated and mistranslated of I'm not enough. Then there's something maybe fundamentally wrong with me. And if there's something fundamentally wrong with me, which is a lie, right? But I was believing that lie. I believed the lie that there was something fundamentally wrong with me because no matter what I did, no matter what awards I did, no matter how much money I was making, no, it didn't matter that on the outside I was being celebrated because there was always voices that you know, I put on a pedestal and I took heavier than my own voice or even the voice of what God was saying about me, as though that was gospel. And I believed it, but it wasn't true. And so
Were these
when you're,
pressures coming from internal, or was it the words that you were hearing other people say? Because it's hard to imagine. I mean, I grew up with abusive parents, well, mother, not father, but I grew up in an abusive household. And so I was always striving to be perfect because if I could be perfect, I wouldn't be in trouble. But that was never the case. That was a false narrative I was telling myself. Were these voices inside your head telling you you need to be more, or were they external words you were hearing from the people around you?
they were external at first, and then, like anything, right? The words are seeds. And so, if I'm listening to these words, being very impressionable, holding other people who are much older than me of higher regard than myself, and then not comparing that to what God was actually saying, what He was saying to me. And so there, that external seed I was receiving, and then what happens with the seed, right? If you're receiving it, then it gets conceived, and then it's getting nurtured by their external voices, and then I'm thinking, well, maybe they're right because it always sounded like wisdom, and that was the trick. It sounded like wisdom, but it was really death. And because I was not wise enough to discern what the truth really was, because it sounded like truth, then the fruit of it was depression. The fruit of that was death because it wasn't life affirming. It wasn't edifying. And since, of course, people who are high achievers, we love personal development. I mean, we find ourselves in personal development from when we're very young. And so it's like, oh, well, of course I want to be better. Of course I want to like do the best that I can. Of course I want to be excellent. Those things within itself is not a bad thing. Those are qualities of a person who has a character of excellence. But when that becomes an inadvertent idol, where we are like, well, I need to be these things because that's what's being asked of me, required of me. It's like, well, who said? If we're made in the image and likeness of God, that means fundamentally there's nothing wrong with us. And it was things that I didn't understand, but going through that process, the last time I tried to take my life, I was like, okay, God, I can't come here again. You're gonna have to show me why am I believing this? That I think that this is okay.
And how old
And
were
that's what brought me to
you? How old were
neuroscience.
you on the last attempt, the final attempt?
Ooh,
And we're going to say
I,
final.
yeah, it was the final. I was at least, was I in my 40s already? Hmm. I might have been like in my late 30s, early 40s. I can't remember right now.
So
But
somewhere in
yeah.
a 20-year period from 22 to 40, let's say, you
Hmm.
attempted 4 times to end your life. How many children did
Hmm.
you have by this time at the last one?
Three?
All three. Okay.
All three, yeah.
So you were under the false belief that your 3 children would be better off without you than with you because you weren't good enough.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's a hard. Did your husband feed into that? Was he a part of that voice you were hearing, or was it still further outside?
Oh no, he was part of it. He was a big part of it.
And how much older was your husband than you?
20 years.
So you were 22 and he was 42 when you
Hmm.
first got married.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a father of a 26-year-old. I can't imagine that I would be sitting down okay with her marrying someone that much
Mhm.
older. And I'm not in a Latino family. How did that go over with your folks?
Well, it's funny because so we were best friends, and then we got engaged, and then we got married. So we never really dated. And when we got engaged, I remember I was telling my mom, my parents, I was like, "Oh, by the way," so they thought I was somebody else because I was in a band, and there was like 7 or 8 of us. It was a big band. So they thought it was this other guitar player. I'm like, "No, not him. The other one." They're like, "Oh, the quiet one, the artist." And I was like, "Yeah, that's him." They're like, "Oh." So I think they were like kind of relieved, but they thought it was somebody else in the band. They're like, "Oh no,
Not that
that one?
guy.
Okay, yeah, he's fine. Yeah, that guy,
Yeah.
he's okay." And it was one of those things where a lot of like positive words and prophecies were talked, spoken over us. Part of it was like the music of what like God really wanted to do with us as a couple. And so when we got married, before we got married, decided that once we started to have children, one of us would come home. And so we were married for a few years, and then we had some miracle. We started having miracle babies because the doctor said that we probably wouldn't be able to get pregnant. And we both grew up in the same town, right? Watching the same TVs. So we were actually very similar. It didn't like the age gap didn't really come into play because we were so similar. So it was like people were like, "Oh, there's such a big age gap," but then they would be around us and be like, "Oh, but you guys are actually like perfectly suited." And I remember, how they take the test for premarital people, and they
Yeah.
like to see the comparison. Like the pastor who was marrying us, he had to get like 7 other pastors to look at the test, and they're like, "We've never seen anybody more perfectly suited." They're like, "There's something wrong with the test." There were like two things that he wasn't sure about when he brought us in together. And it's because we both misinterpreted the question. So once we said it out loud, we found out that we were on the same page. So like our age ended up being like a non-issue even for our pastors because they were concerned. Obviously, they're
Yeah.
like, "What's going on here?" But then after we did the premarital counseling, and then we didn't need any counseling because they're like, "Oh, even on paper, we look like the perfectly matched couple." And so we were gonna do music together, and that was the point. Like after a few years, whoever was still working will come home. And he was an amazing artist. He ended up unfortunately passing away when he was in 2020. But he had more talent in his little pinky than people have in their whole body. I mean, he was literally a genius, had a super high IQ, really smart, funny, very caring. But I would get caught on his brokenness. There was a lot of things that happened to him as a child in his teenage years that were super traumatic. Things that happened in his first marriage that was also very traumatic. And when you're young, you're like, "Oh, love covers everything. He'll be fine. He's a tortured artist. It's okay." And
Yeah.
then you have the opposite me, who is just like, big ball of sunshine. So we did bring out best in each other, but because in retrospect, right now that I understand like the neuroscience part of it, that's really what helped me heal through it. Because even when we were talking at the end, because we had actually were splitting up right before he died. We had already been separated, but all living together for a while as a family because the kids I thought were too young, and I didn't want to not have us together in the family in the same house. And so I remember him and I having a conversation about it. And I said, "Why did you do those things? Why would you say those things?" And he was just like, "I don't know." And that's the thing is like people are like, "Well, if he loved me or this person loved me, they wouldn't do those things. They wouldn't say this thing." But actually it's like that's not the way it works.
It's not.
Like, I know that he loves me with the passion of a thousand suns. Like, love was not the issue. The man adored me. I was the love of his life. I was his best friend till the day he died. I was the love of his life and his best friend. We were still friends after we were not together. I was still his best friend. I just couldn't be his wife.
Thank you for watching Prospera TV Network. We hope you're enjoying the show. We'll be right back after this commercial break.
And when we talk about it, it's like, I don't know. And then once I started learning about neuroscience and how that works and the trauma and what's happening and how we're, 95% of our actions and reactions and decisions are automatic. But there were things that he never got healed of. And because of that, and the lies that he believed about himself that were not true. And it turned out that there was an incident, which I don't remember even the whole story, but 6 weeks into our marriage, I was crying about something. I can't remember even what it was. And he looked at me, he said, "Whatever you're crying about, I don't want to know." And he walked away from me. And that was actually the beginning of the end. He thought, see, he believed a lie. He thought that at that point I realized I shouldn't have married him. And so every day he started to treat me as though any moment I was going to walk out of his life. It took 20 years, over 20 years before it happened. But he was so scared because of the trauma, because of the things that happened in his life. And then he's just like, oh my gosh, she just realized she made a big mistake. And so he was living his life with me in a way that was filled with fear.
But I can relate to a lot of what you're saying because I was broken for the first 58 years of my life as well. And I have a background in psychology, so I know the neuroscience and the
Yeah.
brain, the way it works. And I can see how in my brokenness, I love my wife beyond measure, but I can see in my brokenness how sometimes I didn't speak to her as kindly as she deserved or didn't say things as nicely as I should have. And a lot of that was out of fear. But if you tried suicide 4 times, that means you were with him during all
All
of
of it.
those. If my wife tried one attempt at suicide, that would be a huge wake up call for me, and I'd fix whatever the fuck was wrong. Excuse my language. So, how does someone who loves you so dearly go through one, two, three, 4 attempts and still not
He didn't
do so?
know.
How do you
I
not
didn't tell
know?
anybody because every time that I was like in the process of doing something, I was stopped, but then I didn't tell anybody. So he
Mm,
was not aware. I'm like,
okay.
even when I started to share these stories and stuff, like it was a few years before I've just been open about it in the last like 2 years or so.
Okay.
So when my parents found out, my sister found out, they were like, "What are you talking about?" And then they were starting to feel guilty.
Yeah.
Like, how did I not notice?
Right.
And that's the thing, is like somebody who is very also empathic. I didn't want to have other people be burdened with my pain because then they were trying to carry my pain. And I was like, well, I don't even know how to articulate my pain at that point. How to articulate these things. And so I was a great pretender, especially like in my family. Unfortunately, there was a lot of women in my family who were abused, sexually and emotionally and financially. And we were the house that people ran to. So they would come to our house and they would hide. They would come to our house and they would, get their life together. But I have all these stories of a lot of the women in my family, and so back then, and it's still like that in other places, and I'm sure people have these stories too, where you don't talk about it,
But we
and so it's
become the
like,
great
oh,
pretenders, don't we? We become great at putting on these masks for the rest of the world, and there's no clue that anything, I was joking with my wife the other day. Our family crest could be the theater mask of the happy and sad because there's no clue of what goes on inside the house when you put on the happy mask for outside the house.
Mhm.
And it's disheartening that we all get really good at wearing those masks as opposed to healing and becoming a little more authentic. You said something just a moment ago that is also kind of interesting to me based on what I understand. And I'm a Reformed Catholic, so I understand the world you grew up in. I just didn't enjoy it as much as you did, and I got tired of the priest a little sooner than you did. But you talked about being an empath, and empaths, empathic natures, intuition, cognitive function. Some people have a hard time pairing that with religion and God and what they believe because of most Catholic churches. I don't know about all churches because I've not been in all of them, but been in enough Catholic churches. Most Catholic churches teach out of fear, and they don't teach directly from the Bible. They teach from their interpretation of it. So we get this mixed um, thought in our head about what religion is supposed to be like. And I've said for a long time, religion is the worst thing that happened to God. So, how did you balance your empathic abilities with your knowledge of what God and spirituality are? Because they are mirrored and matched. And I love that as a faith driven woman, you marry the neuroscience with the biblical word with the spirituality. Like you have this nice divine triangle of all three. And so, when did you first start embracing your empathic abilities? And how did you merge that with what you knew God to be?
I think it just kind of happened when I was younger. I recognized, and first husband, I call him that because at some point I know I'll be married again. First husband also had the same gift. I think that's what made him such an incredible artist and writer and poet and guitarist. I mean, he would play a couple of chords, and we would be outside, and people from the neighborhood blocks away would hear him, and they would literally like just sit at his feet. I mean, he had that Pied Piper kind of thing because he was so in tune. The difference was that very young, I was able to recognize that I could pick up on things, and I learned to turn it off. He never learned to turn it off. He couldn't. It was very hard for him. So people who are highly empathic, a lot of times they would come around me. They're like, "Oh, I don't hear any noise." For those of you who are not that sensitive, don't have that gift. If you have a friend who's like, "Oh, it's hard for them to be around a lot of people," because they can feel like vibes or they can feel other people's emotions. So they would come around me, and it was just like quiet. And so, but I learned how to turn it off because otherwise I couldn't function. And as somebody who is, I guess, what is that called now? Ambivert. I'm extroverted and introverted. I love people. I love to be around them. It charges me up, and then I get depleted, and now I have to go and recharge by myself. By myself, I had to learn to do that very young. And as because of the experiences I had, even though I knew, and I think part of that, right, it's like growing up with my parents, and even though my mom had gone through a lot of things, and it's not my story to tell. She'll tell it. She says she's going to tell it when she's ready. But she went through a lot of things, unspeakable things, when she was very young, and because of that, she made decisions with my sister and I out of fear because she didn't want us to go through those things. But it ended up um, protecting us in a lot of ways and also hurting us in other ways. Um, just because of she was operating from a state of like, I do not want my daughters to go through what I went through. And because of that, the way the things that she chose for us and how to speak to us and try to groom us to protect us, it was it was difficult for my sister and I in some ways. And so going through the experience of, I knew watching my parents, like, that God loved us. He always protected us. He always provided for us. I learned to be charitable because my parents are very generous. They're very kind. They're empathic people. They're very compassionate. I guess they're very compassionate, not necessarily empathic, but very, very, very compassionate and generous. And watching that and being in that atmosphere, and then like deciding to spend so much time at church, growing up, that really set a foundation. And then when I was going through those experiences, asking the question like, something's off, something's wrong. And then the first place God took me was actually in quantum physics. I was just like, they're like, "Oh, what are you doing?" "Oh, a little light reading, some quantum physics, some epigenetics."
Light,
I was
yeah,
just doing some
light
light
reading.
reading in my spare time.
Yeah,
And then I recognized as I was studying that, and then I was like going back to the word and really just looking at the word, I'm like, oh, that's why God said that. You know, that's why he said that, in Romans 12:2, that you are transformed by the renewing of your mind, and how important that is. Well, we call it mindset work, we call it personal development, we call it rewiring. But those are the things that he's been telling us all along of like, this is why you hang out with these kind of people. And this is why you have to be mindful of your words. And this is why death and life are in the power of your tongue. Like all these things, it, it wasn't different. Like God was telling us the why, and science was showing us the how, the mechanisms of how those things work, which for me made me appreciate God even more. Like, oh my gosh, you're a genius, God. Like that.
yeah,
And then it was just like, oh, good, I had a V8. That's what you said. I
yeah.
mean, some things we're just gonna have to like take on faith because we don't know yet. But I remember a preacher saying a long time ago that there will come a point where people's faith, almost like they will have to try to be in faith because science is going to explain all the things that God's been telling us all along. But it doesn't take God's power away or like the awe or respect or worship of him, because it just made me feel more loved. Like you've you love us so much because you made us, you know how we operate. And this is why you've been telling us all this time. And it was there. We just didn't know how to unlock what was right in front of us. And so for me, it's just easy because I'm seeing it through the lens of, I am loved by God. We are loved by God. We are made in his image and likeness. What does that mean? Then if we're supposed to operate like him, then how do we operate like him? And then I found a lot of the answers of the mechanisms that matched. They actually have a match to what God is saying in the word through quantum physics and epigenetics and neuroscience. It's actually all in there. Even emotional regulation, all of it's in there. It's
Yeah,
been there the whole time.
that's why I love what you do, because in my coaching practice, I always called it where the woo meets the work, because we were taking these things that people were calling new age and wooey, but showing them how it's based in science, based in the word of God. And, whether they're a believer or a non-believer, you could show them either the science or the scripture, or if they're into it, both. And that was kind of what I appreciate about you. I'm going to pull up these couple of things and we're going to talk about how you got into all this. So, one breakthrough now. I love, by the way, your logo with the spiritual. I call you the spiritual GPS. You call it the GPS for success. But I love the logo and how you have that there. But explain one breakthrough now, and then let's cover all three of these elements.
Sure. And it's one of those things, right? We were talking about in the beginning of like saying yes to the whisper of things. And one breakthrough now is my television show. It is found now on YouTube, and this is being recorded, it just got launched on Roku, and it will be on like Amazon Fire and Android and Apple iOS and things like that. streaming platforms. But the one breakthrough now actually was, I named it that because I had a session with a male client last year. I think it was in the summer. And I remember because he was very straight laced, very left brain, a very like hyper creative as well, but he was very, black and white. And I remember sitting with him and we were talking about things. And he looked and he just looked shocked. And he's just like, you should call these sessions One Breakthrough Now. He said, because like that was the one phrase that the clients kept on giving me. Like, they always had a breakthrough. And it turns out that that's really my superpower. It's like I'm a breaker. And so I will break your limitations is actually part of my name. So when I got the name, Break Your Limitations LLC, I got that through prayer meditation. And a couple of years later, when I did started looking at my name and what it means, it's actually a breaker. Like I break the limitations of rational intellect, and I lead them to the door of grace, which is the word of God. Like all of that is actually in my name, and I was getting that revelation in pieces. And so what the work I was doing with my clients one on one is really what the show is about. So I give like, some foundational work of like what's happening in your brain. So the first season is around the topic words matter because they become matter. And so it's like, okay, what does that mean? It's not an abracadabra. It feels like an abracadabra sometimes because how fast the fruit of your words are manifesting, but our words are always manifesting. And so what do you do? They're happening by default. This is a way you can do it by design. And then here's the neuroscience, here's the epigenetics of it, here's emotional regulation, here's what scripture says about it, and seeing like that really it's all working together. And so the first part of the segment is around giving you understanding. There's a scripture that says, in all you're getting, get understanding. And so the first part is really for you to understand what is happening in your body, what is happening in your brain, what is happening in your cells. This is why it's activating this way in your circumstance. And then the second part of the segment, is around let's coach it. So I have this process called the 1% ACT model, which is 1% is 1% or less of your day, which is 15 minutes or less. And it's ACT, awareness, capture, transmute. And that's what we do together live. So it's basically, even though it's pre-recorded, it's like live for you, right? It's a coaching segment. You have the first part where we're rewiring reality based on that topic. And then the second part where I'm gonna coach you through it so that way you can have your breakthrough during that time. So within that 30 minutes together, it's like a free coaching session. It's like a working masterclass that you get to have with me for free every single week.
And it's pretty phenomenal. I've heard your shows, and you do a great job, especially blending it so that people who, even if you're not religious, you can understand how it applies to your daily life. What about the voiceovers and the song creation and the music by Raquel?
That, just like the show, just kind of happened. So it was funny because I'm in different groups, and one of the memberships that I'm part of, she's a brilliant salesperson. And I love the way she does it because she does positive sales psychology, and that's really like my jam, right? I don't want to manipulate people. I have zero interest on pushing people's pain points. I want to push your desire point. I want to I want to activate your desire so you can go after what you want, because I feel like that's a stronger and better motivator than pain. And and actually it is, for longevity, for business it is. And so I didn't have a mic, and then I finally got a mic. And it was funny because the girls were like, Raquel, it's like, is that what you really sound like? And I was just like, yes, yeah, mic, but I was just like, yes, this is what I really sound like. And so they were like, you need to do voiceover work. It's like, you can do those spicy novels. And I started laughing. And then one of the other girls said, you can do those ASMR things because of the sound of my voice, and I manipulate my voice. And it's funny because I do that with my children. We have our once a week we have our game night together, and so we're doing like, I forget what they're called now. I'm having a brain fart, but we enact the game. So we're always doing like voice work, and so I sound like different people all the time. And so it's a lot of fun. We're very goofy at home, and it turned out that it actually helps with the voiceover work. So I can do voiceover work. I do, especially with audiobooks and things becoming more popular. then that was really encouraged by that sales group, and they're like, "You need to do voiceover work," and I'm like, "Okay." So that's where the voiceovers was actually born, was because other people were just like, "Is that what you really sound like? You should have gotten a mic a long time ago." And
And the
then
song
the song,
creation and the music?
yeah, the song creation and the music, they kind of go together. So last year in December, the music started coming back. And so one of the things that was said over my husband and I was that we were recreating music and it was going to break things off of people. And there was all these like beautiful things, and that didn't come to pass. And I thought that, once he passed away, like that was never going to happen. But the thing is that God never changes his mind about you. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. And those words that were said over me was still there. The music was dormant for about 20 years, 25 years. And all of a sudden, I started hearing music again and lyrics, and it wouldn't go away. And I remember being in prayer meditation, and it was just like the sense that I needed to really create these things that I was hearing. And I was like, "You've got mail, Jesus. You know how, how expensive it is to hire musicians and do all these things? It's like, just write the music, write the words, right? Start composing." And I did, and then with some AI assistance, I'm able to produce the songs, and that's where the music started coming in from. And then I had, everything was working together. So then I had the opportunity to have my own television show, and then I had this thought. It's like a real soft whisper. Why don't you make a your own theme song? And I was like, oh, that sounds fun. That could be fun. So then I created a theme song for myself. And then the next day I had another thought. It was very soft. It's like, why don't you offer it? See if any of the hosts want it. Like pick 5 people, see the first 5 people who want it, and just gift them with it. And I was like, well, what's the worst they can say is no? And that's where the song creation service came from, because then it's been so fun, and it's been incredibly humbling for me, because I've been able to have these conversations with people, and it's like seeing like their mission, their heart, like how they love what they do and how they love their audience so deeply, and be able to translate that into music, and then seeing like the ripple effect. There's like things that are happening that I was just like, oh, for something I thought like, oh, be a cool thing. It's different that you have your own theme song. It's almost like you're on, you're a rock star, you're a celebrity, you have your own song to bop to. But that's like superficial. It's so much more than that. People have been getting healed from songs, and like even having conversations with people like, how do you know me, after like a 20-minute conversation? So all the things that I've been learning about neuroscience, emotional regulation, coaching, emotional intelligence, selling, listening, listening to people really well, um, all of those gifts, you know that were dormant, and I wasn't using them. It's just like they all came back, and it all flooded and culminated to this one thing. It's probably like my favorite part of my work right now. I'm completely obsessed with, with creating theme songs for people, and I made them in different genres. I just finished one today, and it's like a neural soul one. And she was just like, when we were talking earlier, when we were getting on, like she's like, I feel like a celebrity, and she was crying on the phone, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, how did you get this?" You know, After like a 20-minute conversation, I just feel like seen, and that's what people are saying, right? They feel seen and loved, and like, oh, somebody gets them, and that's just been like one of the fruits of creating music for people.
Well, I can certainly say that the music that you created for this show, which is heard on the intro and the outro in pieces, but it's amazing to me that and we only spoke for 15 minutes. We had never spoken before. We spoke for 15 minutes, and you came back with these incredibly powerful lyrics that said exactly what a warrior spirit is about and what it serves and who it's for. And when I did the beta testing on which version to go with, the version that I settled on was settled on because one of the beta testers, she's 72 years old, she said, my daughter and I have been listening to this with the top down in our Mustang, driving around the lake at full blast for like an hour. Can I use it in the movie that's being created for my life? And can I play it at my funeral? I'm like, that's the version. I don't need to do any more beta testing, and that's the version. And then I went the next weekend, and me and Canva got really friendly, and I created a video to go with it. So now I have a music video with a theme song that goes for this, and it's all because of your gifts and your generosity. And listen, my song was okay before. I mean, my show, but that intro and that extra and all that song represents impassions me to do this even more. Because if I'm having a down moment, I turn on that song. I envision live events that I'm going to do in the future. I envision workshops and gatherings, and I envision that song and the music video playing, as people are getting inspired to share their story and learn how to live an authentic life. And what you did and what you do is simply more than amazing. It's a blessing, and I am forever grateful.
Thank you for that. It's like I'm seeing the words that God had spoken over me as in my early 20s. And I was like, who am I to do that? And it was like not into my 50s, that things started to unfold. And that's the thing is like doesn't change his mind about us. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are throwing at us. It's like he's always drawing us back, like you said, right, to the assignment. And part of the assignment was, words matter because they become matter, right? And now the music, what is it doing? It's causing people to be healed and enjoy their life, or to like get their passion back again. Have when you have those down moments, that's why music is so important. The kind of lyrics that you have are so important, is because they are going to either activate life or death. There is no in between. And so that's what I've been finding. And I think that's why I'm so obsessed with it, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I get to like co-create this. I get to like spend time with all these different amazing, cool people, and they're doing all these amazing, interesting things. And then I get to do some fun music to go with it.
Well, it's a beautiful thing. And I'm going to ask you two final questions as we kind of bring this to a close. The first question I'm going to ask you is, who is Raquel today versus who she was 10 years ago?
Hmm. Who I am today is I'm still the same in the point of I'm still open and learning and growing, because I know that there's parts of me that there's still probably lies about myself. I still believe that God only exposes when I'm ready to let it go. And his kindness, he does not show us everything. But who I was before, I mean, I was scared. I didn't really know who I was. I was not confident. And everybody has those moments of imposter syndrome, right? Where no one's 100%. But I think I'm braver now than I was before, or I'm faster at saying yes to the whisper. Just because I'm like, oh, what's the worst that can happen? Nothing will happen of it. Nothing will come out of it if I didn't hear it correct. So I think I'm much more open and creative and willing to follow some instructions, or some things that seem weird, a little bit off. Like, why would you do that? Well, why wouldn't I do it? Why not? Again, what's the worst that can happen? I don't, and that's not who I was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I was still very hurt and broke, still like healing, and not understanding a lot of things, and believing a lot of lies about myself. And I don't believe those lies anymore. They have no hold. And so that's why it's easier for me to talk about things, because since I don't believe it anymore, it's just like I'm talking about somebody else. She literally does not exist anymore. She's gone.
And so, what does a warrior spirit or having a warrior spirit mean to Raquel today?
For me, sometimes I have this picture, and I had one, because again, no one's 100%. We all have our moments. And it's like the willingness to get up. And I've seen this picture sometimes where, we all go through hard days or hard moments or even a hard season. And it's just like I see myself as a warrior. Like I'm like have this gear on like Wonder Woman. She's probably my favorite warrior. And I see myself, and it's almost like fighting, and I fall in the sand and I get up. And as I'm getting up, the sand is falling off. And I really have this attitude of like, you should have killed me when you had the chance. And then I just get very rough and take my power back, and I remember who I am. And that's really what a warrior spirit, it's like, in spite of, we're still going to get up. It might take us a while to get up off the sand or get up off the floor or get up off the bed, but we're going to get up. And when we do, the thing that kept us down will have zero power over us, as though it never existed. And so that's what it means to me.
Well, I'm glad that you're still with us. I'm glad that you're in my tribe of warriors, and it's just an honor to be walking this journey beside you. We are both now on the Prospera TV network, and it's an honor to be hosting shows with people like you. So just thank you for all of that, and thank you for all you do. And, I just appreciate your time today.
Thank you for the invitation. It's always a good time having a conversation with you, Daryl. I really appreciate you.
You're welcome. And if you'd like to connect with Raquel, you can do so on her website, yourgpsforsuccess.net, and all of her social platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and now on Roku through the Prospera TV network TV app. And as always, I want to thank you for joining us on this edition of A Warrior Spirit. Be sure to like or subscribe so you can catch all the episodes. And like I said, we're now not only on YouTube, but also Spotify, Apple Podcast, and all the major platforms, as well as Roku. And as always, the journey is sacred. The warrior is you. So remember, be inspired, be empowered, embrace the spirit of the warrior.
It's not just about the fight, it's how we rise from it. This is your Prospera era, where dreams align with grace, abundance flows like rivers. You've stepped into your place. Rise, reign, and remember, you were born to shine. Welcome to your moment, Prospera, it's time.
We hope you enjoyed today's show on Prospera TV Network. Make it a point to visit us on YouTube and catch all your favorite shows anytime you want. Interested in hosting a show of your own? Or advertising your business on our network? Contact Elena Rodriguez,